No one puts 6 consecutive rounds through a quarter at 2,000 meters. Colonel Hayes' voice cut through the briefing room like a blade. It's physically impossible. Elena Vasquez stood up slowly, her weathered hands steady despite the fire building in her chest. Ma'am, with respect, I can prove you wrong. 2,000 meters downrange. A quarter gleamed silver against the target backstop, no larger than a pinprick through her scope's 25 power magnification. The wind flags hung limp in the Colorado. Stillness, and she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the silence that had fallen over the usually bustling range. Impossible, Colonel Rebecca Hayes had declared just minutes earlier, her voice cutting through the morning air with the authority of someone who had never been proven wrong in her 23-year military career. No one, and I mean no one, put 6 consecutive rounds through a quarter at 2,000 meters, not even our best snipers. It's physically impossible with any rifle system we have in our inventory. Elena had stood there, weathered hands steady. Despite her anger, watching the colonel's officers nod in agreement. The whispers had grown louder after her last deployment to Afghanistan, where a mission had gone sideways and 3 soldiers under her command had come home in flag-draped boxes. This morning was different. This morning, Colonel Hayes had made the mistake of questioning Elena's abilities in front of half the base's command staff, suggesting during the weekly briefing that perhaps it was time to reassign her to training duties. The colonel had smiled. That cold, political smile, and mentioned how the Army needed to evolve with the times and make room for fresh perspectives in our elite units. Elena had requested permission to speak, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. She had looked directly into Colonel Hayes' pale blue eyes and said, "Ma'am, with respect, I can put 6 rounds through a quarter at 2,000 meters. Any day, any conditions, any rifle you choose from our armory." The conference room had fallen silent. Colonel Hayes had laughed, actually laughed, a sound like breaking glass that echoed off the institutional green walls. "Master Sergeant Vasquez, I appreciate your confidence, but let's be realistic here. The human factor alone makes such precision impossible. Wind drift, barrel heating, scope parallax, trigger control variables. There are simply too many factors working against you." "Then let me prove it, ma'am." The colonel had leaned back in her chair, studying Elena with the calculating gaze of someone who had built her career on being right. "Very well, Master Sergeant. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, range 7. Witnesses will be present. You'll use a standard issue weapon system, no modifications, no hand-loaded ammunition. When you fail, and you will fail, I trust you'll accept reassignment to Fort Benning without further protest. If you're enjoying this incredible story of military precision and determination, smash that like button and share this with someone who appreciates true skill. This is just the beginning of Elena's impossible challenge, and it only takes a few seconds to show your support." Colonel Hayes' smile had turned predatory. "If you can accomplish this impossible feat, Master Sergeant Vasquez, I'll personally recommend you for the instructor position at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. But we both know that's not going to happen." Now 12 hours later, Elena lay prone behind the Barrett MRAD that Colonel Hayes had personally selected from the armory, a rifle Elena had never fired before, with factory ammunition and a scope she'd had exactly 10 minutes to zero. The quarter downrange had been placed by Lieutenant Morrison, a young officer who had measured the distance 3 times with a laser rangefinder to ensure accuracy. The morning air was crisp at 42 degrees, humidity at 68%, with variable winds reading anywhere from 0 to 3 miles per hour from the northwest. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun lay beside her with his spotting scope. Even he seemed nervous this morning. "Wind's picking up, Elena," Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of vehicles starting up across the base. 2.5 miles per hour, northwest. Temperatures rising, gonna create thermals. In about 20 minutes. Elena adjusted her position slightly, feeling the familiar ritual of preparation settle over her like a meditation. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped, and the world narrowed to the circular view through her rifle scope. This was the space where she had always felt most at home, where the chaos of combat, the politics of rank, the whispers of doubt all fell away, leaving only the pure mathematics of ballistics and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. Behind them, she could hear Colonel Hayes conferring with the small crowd of officers who had gathered to witness what they clearly expected to be Elena's professional humiliation. Major Thompson from the training division was there, along with Lieutenant Colonel Park from the base commander's office. Even Command Sergeant Major Williams had shown up, though Elena couldn't tell from his expression whether he was hoping she would succeed or fail. Elena closed her eyes, remembering Afghanistan, where she'd first discovered her gift something deeper than training alone. She had first noticed it during a firefight outside Kandahar, when she had been tasked with eliminating a Taliban sniper who had been picking off members of her unit from a ridgeline nearly 1,800 meters away. The shot should have been routine for someone of her training, but as she had settled behind her rifle, something extraordinary had happened. The world had become preternaturally clear, every variable suddenly knowable, every calculation as simple as basic arithmetic. She had fired once, and the distant figure had dropped like a stone. That had been the beginning of her reputation, would follow her through 4 combat deployments, and earn her 3 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts, and the unofficial title of the deadliest female sniper in Army history. But with that reputation had come scrutiny, jealousy, and the constant pressure to prove herself again and again to officers who couldn't understand how a girl from the projects of East Los Angeles had become better at killing than men who had been training for war their entire lives. Elena, Marcus's voice brought her back to the present. Colonel's getting impatient. Says if you need more time to prepare, she's willing to call this off and proceed with your reassignment. Elena's eyes snapped open, and she could hear the barely contained irritation in Colonel Hayes' voice as she spoke to her aide. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Lieutenant. Hesitation under pressure. In combat, this kind of delay gets people killed. The anger that Elena had been holding in check all morning suddenly crystallized into something cold and focused. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, aligned her breathing with the natural rhythm of her heart, and began to work through the ballistic calculations that had become as automatic as breathing. Distance, exactly 2,000 meters. Confirmed by laser measurement. Wind, northwest at 2.5 miles per hour, but dropping. Temperature, 43 degrees and rising. Barometric pressure, 30.15 inches and stable. The quarter looked impossibly small through her scope, a silver dot that seemed to waver in the heat waves that were beginning to rise from the warming earth. Elena made minute adjustments to her scopes. Elevation and windage turrets, feeling the precise clicks of the mechanism under her fingertips. She had studied the ballistic data for this particular rifle system the night before, memorizing the trajectory tables and wind drift calculations. Until they were burned into her memory, her breathing slowed to 6 breaths per minute, then 4. Her heart rate dropped from its resting 60 beats per minute to somewhere in the low 40s, the athlete's pulse of someone who had spent years training her body to achieve peak performance under the most extreme stress. The chatter of voices behind her faded to white noise, then disappeared entirely as she entered the zone of absolute concentration that Marcus had dubbed Elena's place. The first shot broke with the clean surprise that marked perfect trigger control, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder with the familiar push of a .300 Winchester Magnum round, accelerating to nearly 3,000 feet per second. Through her scope, she watched the bullets trace, a barely visible disturbance in the air that marked the projectile's path toward the distant target. "Hit!" Marcus called out, his voice tight with excitement. "Dead center, quarter still there." "That's 1. This precision shooting is absolutely mind-blowing. If you're as amazed as I am by Elena's incredible abilities, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Her movements as fluid and automatic as a pianist running scales. The rifle had settled back into position naturally, her body having absorbed the recoil without disturbing her point of aim. She could feel the barrel temperature rising slightly from the first shot, a factor that would cause the next round to impact perhaps a quarter-inch higher, which she compensated for with a micro-adjustment to her hold. The second shot felt even, cleaner than the first, the trigger breaking at exactly the same weight and travel. Through her scope, Elena could see that the quarter was no longer glinting in the sunlight. The first 2 bullets had scarred its surface, eliminating the reflective shine that had made it visible at this extreme range. 2, Marcus confirmed. Quarter's getting chewed up, but it's still mounted. Jesus, Elena, I can barely see it anymore. Behind them, the murmur of voices had stopped entirely. Elena could practically feel Colonel Hayes' presence pressing against her back, but she pushed the distraction away and focused on the third shot. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming from due west at 1.8 miles per hour according to the flag's downrange. She adjusted her hold accordingly, placing her crosshairs a hair's breadth to the left of where she had been aiming. The third shot fired itself, the trigger seeming to release of its own accord at the perfect moment in her breathing. Cycle. Elena was already cycling the bolt and chambering the 4th round before the bullet had even reached the target, her movements flowing with the mechanical precision of a machine built for one purpose. 3. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I think ... I think you just shot the quarter in half. There's pieces of it hanging from the mount, but there's still target area. Keep going. The 4th shot was the most difficult, requiring Elena to aim at what was essentially empty space where the quarter used to be, trusting in her knowledge of the target's exact position and the consistency of her shooting system. She held her breath at the natural respiratory pause, let her heartbeat settle into its slowest rhythm, and pressed straight back through the trigger. 4. Holy shit, Elena, excuse the language, ma'am, Marcus called out, remembering suddenly that they had an audience of senior officers. Whatever's left of that quarter just got hit again. I count 4 impacts. Elena could sense the tension behind her reaching a breaking point. She could practically hear Colonel Hayes' certainty crumbling with each successful shot, could feel the weight of 23 years of professional reputation hanging in the balance of these final 2 bullets. But those concerns belonged to some other version of herself, the version that worried about politics and career advancement and the ultimate opinions of people who had never looked through a rifle scope in combat, the version of Elena that existed in this moment cared only about the mathematical perfection of the shot sequence, the beautiful simplicity of cause and effect that connected her trigger finger to a target 2,000 meters away. She cycled the bolt with the same fluid motion, chambered the 5th round, and settled back into her shooting position. The 5th shot felt inevitable, like gravity or thermodynamics or any other natural law. The bullet followed the exact same trajectory as the previous 4, guided by Elena's unconscious knowledge of windage and elevation, of how this particular rifle balanced and how this specific ammunition performed. She was no longer consciously aiming. Her body had learned the target's location and was simply repeating the same precise muscle memory. 5, Marcus whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow disturb the magic that was happening. Elena, there's nothing left. The quarter mount is empty. There's just ... fragments. The silence behind them was so complete that Elena could hear her own pulse in her ears, could hear the distant sound of a reveille bugle beginning the daily routine on the far side of the base. She chambered the 6th and final round, feeling the smooth action of the bolt sliding home, the subtle click of the firing pin cocking, the weight of the cartridge settling into the chamber. This last shot was different from the others. While the first 5 had been aimed at a physical target, this one would be aimed at pure memory, at the exact coordinates in space where the quarter had been mounted, trusting that her previous impacts had not disturbed the mounting system enough to throw off her point of aim. It was a shot that existed more in the realm of faith than ballistics, requiring Elena to believe in her own capabilities with a certainty that bordered on the supernatural. She closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the target area as it had appeared in her scope before the first shot had scarred its surface. She could see the quarter's position relative to the mounting system, could remember the exact mil-dot holdover she had been using, could feel in her bones the precise sight picture that had guided the previous 5 rounds to their mark. Elena opened her eyes, settled her crosshairs on empty air, and fired the 6th shot with the same mechanical precision as the others. The rifle recoiled one final time, the sound of the gunshot echoing off the distant hills before fading into the morning silence. 6, Marcus said quietly. Elena, I think you just did something that's never been done before. Elena remained motionless behind the rifle for a long moment, letting the achievement settle into her consciousness. Then she engaged the safety, rolled away from the shooting position, and stood up to face Colonel Hayes and the assembled officers. Her expression was calm, almost serene, showing no trace of the effort or concentration that had made the impossible shots possible. Colonel Hayes stood frozen, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and something that might have been respect. The other officers looked like they had just witnessed a miracle, which in many ways they had. The mathematical probability of what Elena had just accomplished was so low as to be essentially impossible, yet they had all seen it happen with their own eyes. Master Sergeant Vasquez, Colonel Hayes said finally, her voice carefully controlled. That was ... impressive. Lieutenant Morrison, please confirm the target status. The young officer was already jogging downrange with a pair of binoculars, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he covered the 2,000-meter distance that Elena's bullets had traversed in less than 3 seconds each. The officers waited in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. 20 minutes later, Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Target confirmed, ma'am. 6 impacts, all within the original $250 footprint. The quarter has been completely destroyed, but all fragments remain within the mounting ring. Photographs taken for documentation. Elena watched Colonel Hayes process this information, saw the exact moment when professional integrity overcame personal pride. The colonel straightened her shoulders, clasped her hands behind her back, and looked Elena directly in the eye. Master Sergeant Vasquez, you have my apologies for doubting your capabilities. You also have my recommendation for the SOTIC instructor position, effective immediately. She paused, seeming to struggle with something. I've been in the Army for 23 years, and I've never seen shooting like that. How ... How is it even possible? Elena considered the question, thinking about the years of training, the combat deployments, the countless hours spent perfecting her craft. But those were just the visible components of something much deeper, something that she had never fully understood herself. Ma'am, she said finally, what an incredible demonstration of human potential. If this story inspired you or left you speechless like it did me, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Stories like Elena's remind us that the impossible is always possible with the right mindset. Subscribe for more amazing true stories of extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. Elena's alarm clock buzzed at 0445 every morning, just as it had for the past 18 years of military service. She would lie in the narrow bed of her on-base quarters for exactly 30 seconds, letting her mind transition from whatever dreams or nightmares had occupied her sleep to the concrete reality of another day at Fort Carson. The routine never varied. 30 seconds of stillness, then feet on the cold linoleum floor, then the mechanical progression through morning hygiene, physical training, and the careful preparation of coffee that would fuel her through whatever challenges the day presented. This morning was different, though. This morning, Elena found herself staring at the ceiling of her Spartan quarters, replaying the events of the previous day in vivid detail. The look on Colonel Hayes' face when Lieutenant Morrison had confirmed the target hits. The stunned silence of the assembled officers. The way Marcus had shaken his head in disbelief as they cleaned the Barrett and returned it to the armory. Even now, 12 hours later, the achievement felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. Elena's quarters reflected the pragmatic minimalism of a career soldier who had learned to pack her entire life into 2 duffel bags at a moment's notice. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photograph, her graduating class from Sniper School at Fort Benning, 22 young faces full of confidence and patriotic fervor. She was the only woman in the photo, standing in the back row with her shoulders squared and her chin raised in an expression of defiant determination that she recognized as her armor against a world that had never quite known what to do with her. The photograph had been taken 11 years ago, but Elena could remember that day with perfect clarity. She had graduated second in her class, losing the honor graduate designation by half a point on the final written exam, a result that had nothing to do with her shooting ability and everything to do with her working class education and the gaps in her technical knowledge that the Army had spent months helping her fill. The instructors had been fair but skeptical, uncertain whether a 5'4" Hispanic woman from East LA had the physical and mental toughness for the demands of precision shooting in combat. Elena rose from bed and moved to her small kitchen, following the coffee ritual that had become as essential as breathing. French press, water heated to exactly 200 degrees, 4 minutes of steeping time while she performed her morning stretching routine. The coffee was one of the few luxuries she allowed herself, purchased from a specialty roaster in Colorado Springs that imported beans from the mountains of Guatemala, a small connection to her grandmother's homeland that helped ground her in something beyond the institutional green of military life. As the coffee steeped, Elena's mind drifted to her childhood in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of East Los Angeles, where gunshots were a nightly soundtrack, and survival often depended on the ability to disappear into the background of urban decay. She had learned to move silently through the apartment she shared with her grandmother, Abuela Carmen, whose arthritic hands shook too badly to steady a coffee cup, but whose voice remained strong enough to fill the small space with stories of a Mexico that existed more in memory than reality. Abuela Carmen had been the one to recognize Elena's unusual gift for focus and precision. While other children fidgeted through homework or gave up on tasks that required patience, Elena would spend hours working on intricate puzzles, threading needles with thread so fine it was almost invisible, practicing penmanship until her letters achieved a machine-like perfection. Her grandmother had called it la concentration, the concentration, and had treated it with the reverence due to something sacred and rare. Mia, Abuela Carmen would say, watching Elena work on some impossibly detailed project. God gives every person one perfect gift. Yours is the ability to make the impossible look simple. You must be careful how you use it. Elena poured her coffee and settled into the single chair at her small table, opening the morning briefing documents that had been delivered to her quarters the night before. The top folder contained her new assignment orders effective immediately. She was to report to the Special Operations Target Interdiction course at Fort Benning as a senior instructor, with responsibility for training the Army's next generation of precision marksmen. It was an honor that represented the pinnacle of achievement in her field, the kind of assignment that officers spent entire careers working toward. Yet as Elena read through the detailed job description, she felt a familiar hollowness settling in her chest. Another assignment, another group of young soldiers to train, another opportunity to share her technical knowledge. while carefully avoiding any discussion of the deeper aspects of her abilities. She had become expert at teaching the mechanics of long-range shooting ballistics calculations, weather reading, equipment maintenance while keeping the more mystical elements of her gift carefully locked away. The truth was that Elena had never fully understood her own capabilities. She could explain the physics of bullet flight and the psychology of trigger control, but she had no rational explanation for the moments when time seemed to slow and the world became perfectly clear. She couldn't teach other snipers how to achieve the zone of absolute focus that allowed her to make impossible shots, because she had never consciously learned it herself. It simply happened, as natural and involuntary as breathing or blinking. This inability to fully explain her gift had created a strange isolation that followed Elena throughout her career. She was respected, even revered, by her peers, but always at a distance that acknowledged the gap between her abilities and theirs. Other snipers would study her techniques obsessively, asking detailed questions about her equipment settings and shooting positions. But Elena knew they were searching for secrets that didn't exist in any form they could replicate. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming text message from her sister Maria, who still lived in their childhood neighborhood and worked as a nurse at County U.S.C. Medical Center. The message was brief. Saw the news story about your shooting thing. Very proud. Call Abuela, she's been talking about you all week. The news story. Elena had forgotten that Lieutenant Morrison's documentation photos from the quarter shoot had somehow found their way to a military blogger, who had posted them online with breathless commentary about the most incredible marksmanship display in modern military history. The story had been picked up by several mainstream news outlets, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a viral sensation that had brought unwanted attention to Elena's normally private world. Elena scrolled through her phone, finding dozens of missed calls from reporters and television producers wanting to interview America's deadliest female sniper. There were offers to appear on morning talk shows, invitations to shooting competitions with prize money that exceeded her annual salary, and even a preliminary inquiry from a Hollywood agent about the film rights to her life story. All of it felt surreal and vaguely nauseating, like watching herself become a character in someone else's narrative. She deleted the messages without reading most of them and pulled up her grandmother's contact information. Carmen Vasquez was 87 years old now, her memory fading in some areas while remaining crystal clear in others. But her voice still carried the authority of someone who had raised a family through poverty and discrimination with nothing but will and wisdom. "Mia," Abuela Carmen said when she answered the phone, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. "I saw you on the television." Maria showed me the pictures on her computer machine. 6 bullets through a tiny coin, 2,000 meters away. Even your grandfather would have been impressed, and he could shoot a rabbit at 300 yards with an old rifle that had no scope. Elena smiled despite her complicated feelings about the media attention. "It was just a demonstration, Abuela. Nothing special. Nothing special?" Carmen's voice carried the tone of gentle rebuke that Elena remembered from childhood. "Mia, you have spent your whole life pretending your gift is nothing special. But God doesn't give talents like yours to people who are supposed to hide them away like shameful secrets." Elena sipped her coffee, feeling the familiar weight of her grandmother's expectations. Carmen had always believed that Elena's abilities were meant for something greater than military service, though she had never been able to articulate exactly what that something might be. The old woman had grown up in a world where exceptional gifts were viewed through the lens of Catholic mysticism, where unusual talents were seen as divine blessings that carried corresponding responsibilities. "The reporter on the television said you might leave the army," Carmen continued. "Said there were people offering you money to do shooting competitions and gun shows. Is this true?" Elena considered the question carefully. The offers were real, and some of them were substantial enough to change her life dramatically. Professional shooting competitions offered prize money and sponsorship opportunities that could make her financially independent. Television appearances and product endorsements could provide a steady income that didn't require her to maintain military discipline or accept assignments that sent her halfway around the world. But something about those opportunities felt wrong to Elena, like a betrayal of the deeper purpose that her abilities were meant to serve. She had never shot for money or fame or personal recognition. Every bullet she had fired in her military career had been in service of something larger than herself, the protection of her fellow soldiers, the completion of missions that served national interests, the development of skills that could save lives in combat situations. "I don't know, Abuela," Elena said honestly. "The Army has been my home for 18 years. It's the only place where my abilities have ever made sense, where being exceptional at shooting was seen as valuable rather than strange. I'm not sure I know how to be Elena Vasquez without my uniform and my rifle." Carmen was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could hear the sound of morning television in the background of the small apartment where she had spent her childhood. When her grandmother spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades spent watching Elena struggle with the burden of being different. "Mia, I am going to tell you something that I should have told you years ago. Your gift lay at concentration. It didn't come from practicing puzzles or learning to be patient. It came from your father." Elena nearly dropped her coffee cup. Her father, Sergeant Miguel Vasquez, had been killed in a training accident at Fort Irwin when Elena was 6 years old. She had only the haziest memories of him, a tall man in desert camouflage who smelled like gun oil and aftershave, who would lift her onto his shoulders and tell her stories about the desert where soldiers learned to be brave. "What do you mean?" "It came from him," Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miguel was a sniper too, in the first Gulf War," Carmen said. "He never talked about it much, but I saw his medals, his certificates. The Army sent representatives to his funeral, important men who spoke about his exceptional marksmanship and his unique contributions to military operations. I didn't understand then, but I think he had the same gift that you have." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a piece of identity sliding into place like a key turning in a lock. Suddenly, the mystical aspects of her abilities felt less isolated, less like a genetic accident, and more like an inheritance that connected her to a father she had barely known. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" Elena asked. "Because I was afraid it would make you think your gift was only for killing," Carmen replied. Miguel struggled with that, with the idea that God had given him this amazing ability, but that the only place he could use it was in war. "I wanted you to find your own path, to discover that there might be other purposes for law concentration." Elena sat in silence, processing this revelation while the morning sunlight streamed through her small kitchen window. Outside, she could hear the familiar sounds of the base coming to life, reveille playing over the public address system, the rumble of vehicles heading to morning formations, the distant cadence calls of soldiers conducting physical training. For 18 years, she had built her identity around the assumption that her abilities were unique, that she was somehow fundamentally different from other soldiers and other people. The knowledge that her father had shared her gift changed everything, connecting her to a legacy that extended beyond her own experience. But it also raised new questions about the true nature of her abilities and their ultimate purpose. If her father had struggled with the same questions about the moral implications of exceptional marksmanship, what conclusions had he reached? What would he have wanted her to do with the inheritance he had unknowingly passed down to her? Elena finished her coffee and began preparing for another day at Fort Carson, but her mind remained focused on the conversation with her grandmother. As she dressed in her Army combat uniform, adjusting the patches and insignia that marked her rank and qualifications, she found herself wondering what her father would have thought about yesterday's demonstration. Would he have been proud of her technical achievement, or would he have shared her complicated feelings about the media attention and commercial opportunities that had resulted from it. The morning formation proceeded with its usual efficiency. But Elena found it difficult to concentrate on the routine announcements and administrative details. Staff Sergeant Chun caught her attention with a subtle nod toward a cluster of junior soldiers, who were whispering among themselves and stealing glances in her direction. Word of the quarter shoot had spread throughout the base overnight, transforming Elena from a respected but relatively anonymous senior non-commissioned officer into something approaching a celebrity. After formation, Elena retreated to the range, facility where she spent most of her working hours. The building was a concrete block structure that housed the base's precision marksmanship program, filled with rifles, optics, ammunition, and the technical equipment used to train Army snipers. It was her sanctuary, the place where her abilities felt most natural and purposeful. Elena spent the morning reviewing training records and preparing lesson plans for the classes she would teach before her transfer to Fort Benning. The work was routine but satisfying, requiring her to break down complex concepts into digestible pieces that could be understood by soldiers with varying levels of experience and education. She had always been a patient instructor, remembering her own struggles with the technical aspects of long-range shooting and the encouragement she had received from mentors who saw potential in a young woman who didn't fit the traditional sniper profiled out at 10:30 hours. Her administrative routine was interrupted by a knock on her office door. Elena looked up to see a young female soldier in dress uniform, her posture rigid with the nervous energy of someone meeting a personal hero for the first time. "Master Sergeant Vasquez, I'm Private First Class Sarah Martinez from Bravo Company. I was wondering if I could speak with you about the sniper program." Elena studied the young soldier, noting the precise arrangement of her uniform, the careful attention to detail that suggested either natural perfectionism or intense nervousness. Martinez couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with dark eyes that reminded Elena of her own reflection at that age, eager, determined, and slightly intimidated by the world she was trying to enter. "Of course, Private Martinez, have a seat." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I help you with?" Martinez perched on the edge of the chair, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. "Ma'am, I heard about what you did yesterday, the quarter at 2,000 meters. Everyone's talking about it. And I wanted to ask if you think someone like me could ever learn to shoot like that." Elena considered the question carefully. She had received similar inquiries hundreds of times over the years, from soldiers who were inspired by her achievements and wanted to understand whether they possessed the potential for similar success. Most of them were looking for encouragement, for confirmation that exceptional marksmanship was simply a matter of training and practice rather than innate talent. "Tell me about your background, Private Martinez. Have you done much shooting before?" Joining the Army? Martinez shook her head. "No, ma'am. I grew up in Phoenix, in the suburbs. My family was. They were pretty anti-gun, actually. I'd never even held a rifle before basic training. But when I started shooting in 8-something, clicked. My drill sergeant said I had natural ability, that I should consider applying for specialized training." Elena recognized something familiar in the young soldier's description, the sudden discovery of unexpected talent, the sense of natural affinity for something she had never tried before. It was the same feeling Elena had experienced during her own basic training, when her first trip to the rifle range had revealed abilities that surprised everyone, including herself. "What's your current qualification level?" Elena asked. "Expert marksman on the M4, ma'am. But I feel like I could do better if I had the right training. When I'm shooting, it's like time slows down and I can see exactly where the bullet needs to go. Does that make sense?" Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The description was almost identical to her own experience of entering the zone, the state of hyperconcentration that allowed her to achieve seemingly impossible accuracy. She had never heard another soldier describe the phenomenon in such similar terms. Private Martinez, how often do you experience that feeling of time slowing down? Martinez looked relieved to be discussing something that she had probably never been able to articulate before. Almost every time I shoot, ma'am. But only when I'm really focused, really committed to the shot. It's like the rifle becomes part of me, and I know exactly what's going to happen before I pull the trigger. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying the young soldier with new interest. If Martinez was describing genuine symptoms of the same hyperconcentration ability that Elena possessed, it would represent the first time she had encountered someone with similar natural gifts. The implications were both exciting and unsettling. Exciting, because it suggested that her abilities might not be as unique as she had believed. Unsettling because it raised questions about the nature of the gift and how it should be developed. Private Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're describing is unusual. Most soldiers, even very good ones, don't experience that kind of time distortion during shooting. It suggests that you might have natural abilities that could be developed into something exceptional. Martinez's eyes widened with excitement. Does that mean I could apply for sniper school? Elena held up a cautioning hand. It means you have potential, but potential is just the starting point. Becoming a sniper requires more than just natural shooting ability. It requires physical toughness, mental discipline, mathematical aptitude, and the psychological ability to take a human life when necessary. Are you prepared for all of that? The excitement in Martinez's expression dimmed slightly as she considered the full implications of what Elena was describing. Elena had seen this reaction many times before. Soldiers who were drawn to the romantic image of precision, marksmanship without fully understanding the moral weight of becoming a professional killer. I think so, ma'am, Martinez said after a long pause. I mean, I know it would be difficult, but I feel like this ability I have, it feels like it's meant for something important. Like it would be wrong to waste it. Elena felt an unexpected surge of recognition and sympathy. Martinez was struggling with the same sense of purpose and responsibility that had driven Elena's own career choices, the feeling that exceptional abilities carried corresponding obligations. It was a burden that Elena had carried alone for most of her adult life, and she found herself wondering if she had a responsibility to help this young soldier navigate the same challenges. Private Martinez, I'm being transferred to Fort Benning next week to become an instructor at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. If you're serious about pursuing sniper training, I can arrange for you to receive some preliminary coaching before you apply for the program. But I want you to understand something. First, this isn't a game. The abilities you're describing, if they're genuine, will change your life in ways you can't imagine. Martinez nodded earnestly. I understand, ma'am. I'm ready for that responsibility. Elena studied the young soldier's face, seeing her own younger self reflected in those determined eyes. Are you? Because I'm not sure I was ready, even after 18 years of carrying it. That afternoon, Elena found herself at the base chapel, a place she visited irregularly, but always when she needed to think through difficult decisions. The building was nearly empty at 1400 hours. Just her and an elderly chaplain who nodded politely from the front pew where he sat reading. Elena slipped into a back row and let her mind wander through the conversation with Private Martinez. The encounter had stirred up feelings that Elena had spent years carefully compartmentalizing. Meeting someone who might share her unusual abilities forced her to confront questions about her own purpose and the true nature of the gift she had inherited from her father. Was she meant to be a teacher, passing on her knowledge to the next generation? Was she supposed to use her abilities in some completely different context? Or was she overthinking a simple biological accident that had made her exceptionally good at one particular skill? Elena's phone buzzed with another text message, this one from Marcus Chun. Elena, you need to see this. Someone recorded yesterday's shoot from the observation tower. It's all over YouTube. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The last thing she wanted was more media attention, more people trying to turn her abilities into entertainment or profit. She had seen what happened to other soldiers who became minor celebrities, the way their service became secondary to their public personas, how their effectiveness was compromised by the constant pressure to perform for cameras and crowds. As she sat in the quiet chapel, Elena began to wonder if her resistance to publicity was really about protecting her effectiveness, or if it was about protecting herself from having to examine the deeper implications of her gifts. For 18 years, she had been content to be an exceptionally skilled soldier, using her abilities in service of military objectives without questioning whether there might be larger purposes she was meant to serve. The conversation with her grandmother had changed something fundamental in her understanding of herself. Learning that her father had possessed similar abilities suggested that her gifts were part of a larger pattern, perhaps even a family legacy that carried responsibilities she had never considered. If Miguel Vasquez had struggled with questions about the purpose of his exceptional marksmanship, what conclusions had he reached? What would he want his daughter to do with the inheritance he had left her? Elena left the chapel without any clear answers, but with a growing sense that her life was approaching the inflection point. The transfer to Fort Benning represented more than just a career advancement. It was an opportunity to reshape her role from pure practitioner to teacher and mentor. Working with Private Martinez had reminded her of the satisfaction she felt when helping other soldiers discover their own potential, the sense of purpose that came from nurturing abilities that might otherwise go undeveloped. That evening, Elena returned to her quarters to find her phone ringing with yet another call from a media representative. This time, instead of immediately declining, she listened to the voicemail. The caller was a producer from a documentary series about military heroes, offering Elena the opportunity to tell her story in her own words rather than letting others define her narrative. Master Sergeant Vasquez, I know you've been declining media requests, but I wanted to reach out personally because I think there's an important story here that goes beyond just the technical achievement. We're interested in exploring what it means to possess exceptional abilities in service of something larger than yourself, and how people like you navigate the responsibility that comes with that kind of gift. Elena played the message twice, struck by how closely the producer's description matched her own internal struggles. Perhaps there was value in sharing her story, not for personal recognition or financial gain, but as a way of exploring questions that she had never been able to discuss with anyone else. If her abilities were truly as rare as they seemed, maybe her experiences could provide insight for other people struggling with similar burdens. Elena spent the rest of the evening reviewing her personnel files and preparation materials for the Fort Benning transfer. As she worked, her mind kept returning to the conversation with Private Martinez and the unexpected sense of connection she had felt with someone who might understand the strange isolation of possessing abilities that others found almost supernatural. For the first time in years, Elena began to consider the possibility that her true purpose might extend beyond individual achievement or even military service. Perhaps she was meant to be a bridge between the mystical aspects of exceptional ability and the practical demands of military effectiveness. Perhaps her father's legacy was not just the gift itself, but the responsibility to help others understand and develop similar abilities. Elena's phone rang again at 2100 hours, and this time she answered without checking the caller ID. Master Sergeant Vasquez. This is Colonel Hayes. I hope I'm not calling too late. Elena straightened unconsciously, responding to the authority in her commanding officer's voice even over the phone. Not at all, ma'am. How can I help you? I wanted to inform you personally that I've received several inquiries about your transfer to Fort Benning. Apparently, word of yesterday's demonstration has reached some very high levels in the Pentagon. There are people who want to understand how you achieved what you did, and whether your techniques can be systematized and taught to other soldiers. Elena felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, The idea of turning her abilities into a standardized training program felt wrong on multiple levels, like trying to reduce something sacred and personal to a series of technical procedures. "Ma'am, I'm not sure my methods can be easily replicated. There are aspects of what I do that are difficult to explain in conventional terms." Colonel Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Master Sergeant, can I speak to you off the record?" "Of course." "Ma'am, I've been thinking about yesterday's demonstration, and I've come to some conclusions that I probably shouldn't share with anyone above my pay grade. What you did wasn't just exceptional marksmanship, it was something that transcends normal human capability. I don't understand it, and I'm not sure I want to understand it. But I think the Army needs people like you more than we know how to appreciate." Elena was surprised by the Colonel's candor. "Ma'am? What I'm saying is that your transfer to Fort Benning puts you in a unique position. You'll be working with the most promising marksmen in the Army, soldiers who might have abilities similar to yours. If there are others out there with your kind of gift, you're probably the only person qualified to recognize and develop those abilities." Elena thought about Private Martinez, about the familiar way she had described the experience of hyperconcentration during shooting. "You think there are others?" "I think abilities like yours don't occur in isolation. I think the Army has probably had soldiers with similar gifts throughout its history, but we've never had anyone qualified to identify and train them properly. You could change that." After Colonel Hayes ended the call, Elena sat in her small kitchen staring at the framed photograph of her sniper school graduation class. For the first time, she wondered how many of those 22 faces might have possessed abilities they never fully developed, talents that went unrecognized because there was no framework for understanding them. Elena opened her laptop and began drafting an email to the producer who had left the voicemail about the documentary. If she was going to step into a larger role as a teacher and mentor, perhaps it was time to start talking openly about the aspects of exceptional marksmanship that had always been considered too mystical or inexplicable for serious discussion. As she typed, Elena found herself thinking about her father, wondering what advice he might have given her about the responsibilities that came with their shared gift. She had spent her entire adult life trying to honor his memory through military service, but perhaps true honor required something more: the courage to explore the deeper purposes that their abilities were meant to serve. Elena finished the email and hit send before she could second-guess herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to understand the true nature of her gifts. For the first time in years, she felt ready to embrace those challenges, rather than simply endure them. The last thing Elena did before sleep was call her grandmother back. "Abuela, I've been thinking about what you said about Papa's gift. Do you think he would have wanted me to keep it hidden, or to use it to help other people understand what they're capable of?" Carmen's voice was warm with pride when she answered. "Mia, your father spent his whole life wondering if his abilities were a blessing or a curse. I think he would want you to prove that they can be both, and that the difference lies in how you choose to use them." The documentary crew arrived at Fort Carson 3 days later, just as Elena was finalizing her preparations for the transfer to Fort Benning. She had expected a small operation, maybe 2 or 3 people with handheld cameras, but instead found herself facing a full production team with enough equipment to outfit a small television station. The producer, David Chen, no relation to Marcus, was a lean man in his 40s, with the intense energy of someone who had spent his career chasing stories that others missed. "Master Sergeant Vasquez, thank you for agreeing to this," David said, as his crew set up lights and cameras in the range facility. "I know this kind of attention isn't something you're comfortable with, but I think there's an important conversation to be had about exceptional ability and what it means in a military context." Elena watched the crew work with a mixture of fascination and unease. She had agreed to the documentary partly out of curiosity and partly because Colonel Hayes had suggested it might help the Army better understand and utilize soldiers with unusual abilities. But seeing the cameras and lighting equipment made the whole thing feel uncomfortably commercial, like her personal struggles were being turned into entertainment. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this?" Elena asked David as a sound. Technician clipped a microphone to her uniform. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure yet," David replied. "But I've been researching exceptional marksmanship for months, and your name keeps coming up in contexts that go beyond normal military achievement. There are people in the special operations community who talk about you like you're something more than human. I want to understand what that means, and whether there are others like you." The first interview session took place in Elena's office, with cameras positioned to capture both her and the wall of certificates, photographs, and awards that documented her career. Elena had never paid much attention to the visual impact of her accumulated achievements, but seeing them through the camera's perspective made her realize how extraordinary her record actually appeared to outside observers. David's first questions were routine background information about her childhood, her path to military service, her training and development as a sniper. Elena answered mechanically, providing the sanitized version of her story that she had learned to recite for official purposes. But as the interview progressed, David's questions became more probing, forcing her to examine aspects of her experience that she had always kept private. "Master Sergeant, you've described your abilities as natural talent developed through training, but other soldiers who know you personally use different language. Staff Sergeant Chun told me that when you're shooting, it's like watching someone access a different level of reality. Can you explain what that means?" Elena felt a familiar discomfort at having her private experiences exposed to scrutiny. "I think Marcus might be exaggerating. What I do isn't mysterious, it's just the result of years of practice and preparation." David leaned forward, his expression gentle but persistent. "But you've also described moments of what you call hyper-concentration, where time seems to slow down and variables become clear in ways that go beyond normal perception. That doesn't sound like standard training results." Elena glanced at the cameras, suddenly aware that her words would be preserved and broadcast to audiences who might not understand the context of her experiences. The temptation was to deflect, to maintain the comfortable fiction that her abilities were simply the product of hard work and dedication. But she found herself thinking about Private Martinez, about the young soldier's description of time slowing down during shooting. If there were others with similar abilities, didn't they deserve to know that they weren't alone? Didn't they deserve to understand that their experiences had precedent and validity? "Sometimes," Elena said carefully, "when everything aligns perfectly, my position, my breathing, my mental state, I enter a zone where normal limitations seem to disappear. It's not something I can control or summon at will. It just happens, and when it does, I can achieve things that should be mathematically impossible." David nodded encouragingly. "Can you describe what that zone feels like?" Elena closed her eyes. For a moment, trying to find words for an experience that had always existed beyond language. "It's like stepping outside of time. My heart rate drops, my vision becomes preternaturally clear, and I can see the entire shot sequence playing out. Before I pull the trigger, I know where the bullet will go before I fire it, not because I've calculated it, but because I can see it." "And this is something you inherited from your father?" Elena's eyes snapped open. She hadn't mentioned her father's abilities during their preliminary conversations, and she wondered how David had learned about that connection. "You've been doing research," Elena said, not quite a question. "I have. Military records from the First Gulf War mention a Sergeant Miguel Vasquez whose exceptional marksmanship capabilities contributed significantly to mission success. There are also after-action reports that describe shots that seem to exceed normal human capability. When I realized he was your father, it suggested that what you can do might have a genetic component." Elena felt exposed, as if David had uncovered secrets she hadn't known she was keeping. The idea that her father's military records contained evidence of abilities similar to her own was both thrilling and unsettling. It confirmed her grandmother's stories, but also raised new questions about the nature of their shared gift. "What else did you find in those records?" Elena asked. "Enough to suggest that exceptional marksmanship might be more common in military families than anyone realizes. There are patterns in the data, certain surnames that appear repeatedly in sniper schools and special operations units, families with multiple generations of precision marksmen, clusters of ability that suggest something more than random talent." Distribution. Elena absorbed this information with growing amazement. If David's research was accurate, it meant that her abilities weren't unique or inexplicable. They were part of a larger pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The interview was interrupted by a commotion outside Elena's office. Through the window, she could see a crowd gathering around someone near the range entrance. Marcus Chun appeared in the doorway, his expression tense with concern. "Elena, we've got a problem. That video of your quarter shoot has gone completely viral. There are people showing up at the base gates asking to meet you. Security is having to turn away reporters, bloggers, and what looks like every gun enthusiast within a 500-mile radius." Elena cursed under her breath. The last thing she needed was a circus atmosphere disrupting the serious work of the range facility. "How many people are we talking about?" Last count was around 50, but more keep arriving. Someone set up a live stream of the base entrance, and there are chat rooms organizing pilgrimages to meet the woman who made the impossible shot. It's getting out of hand. David looked excited rather than concerned by this development. "Master Sergeant, this is exactly what I was hoping to capture, the public reaction to genuine exceptional ability. Would you be willing to go out and talk to some of these people?" Elena shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. These people aren't here for serious discussion about marksmanship. They're here for entertainment, for the chance to meet a curiosity. I won't be part of that. But don't you think you have a responsibility to help people understand what's possible?" David pressed. "There might be others in that crowd with similar abilities, people who have never had the chance to develop their potential because they didn't know it existed." Elena considered this argument, thinking again about Private Martinez and her own years of feeling isolated by abilities she couldn't explain. Perhaps David was right. Perhaps there was value in demonstrating that exceptional ability was real and achievable, even if it meant enduring some public attention. "I'll go out there," Elena said finally. "But not as a performer or a celebrity. If there are people with genuine questions about marksmanship or military service, I'll talk to them. But I won't sign autographs or pose for selfies." The crowd outside the range facility was larger and more diverse than Elena had expected. There were military veterans wearing unit patches from conflicts spanning 4 decades, young civilians with expensive hunting rifles slung over their shoulders, middle-aged gun enthusiasts clutching printed copies of the viral video, and even a few children who had apparently been brought by parents eager to expose them to living history. Elena approached the group with Marcus and David flanking her, trying to project calm authority despite her internal discomfort. The crowd immediately pressed forward, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions and requests for autographs. "Please," Elena said, raising her voice to cut through the noise. "I'm willing to answer questions about marksmanship and military service, but I need you to respect the fact that this is an active military installation with important work being conducted." A young man near the front of the crowd raised his hand. "Master Sergeant, is it true that you can see where the bullet will hit before you fire? Because I've heard that some snipers develop almost supernatural abilities." Elena chose her words carefully. "Exceptional marksmanship is the result of training, practice, and mental discipline. There's nothing supernatural about it. But at the highest levels, there are aspects of the skill that can seem to transcend normal limitations." An older veteran pushed forward, his face intense with emotion. Ma'am, I served as a spotter in Vietnam, and I saw things that didn't make sense according to the ballistics manuals. Shots that should have been impossible, but somehow found their targets anyway. Are you saying that's real? Elena studied the veteran's face, seeing the sincerity of someone who had witnessed something extraordinary and spent decades wondering if it had really happened. What's your name, soldier? Jerry Patterson, ma'am. 1st Cavalry Division, 1969 to 1971. Mr. Patterson, what you saw was real. There are people with abilities that go beyond standard training, but they're rare and often difficult to understand or explain. The military has always had such individuals, but we've never had a good framework for recognizing or developing those abilities. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. I knew it. I knew what I saw was real. My spotter partner could make shots that the math said were impossible, but nobody would believe me when I tried to explain it after the war. Elena felt a surge of connection with this old soldier who had carried the burden of witnessing the inexplicable for over 50 years. She realized that her own struggles with understanding her abilities were part of a much larger pattern of isolation and confusion that had affected countless military personnel throughout history. What was your partner's name? Elena asked. Tommy Nguyen. He was Amerasian, grew up in Saigon before the war. Had this way of knowing exactly where targets were, even when they were concealed. Could thread a bullet through jungle canopy that should have deflected any shot. Command never understood how he did it, just kept giving him the impossible missions, because somehow he always delivered. Elena felt a chill of recognition. Patterson's description of Tommy Nguyen sounded remarkably similar to her own experiences. With hyperconcentration and intuitive target acquisition, she wondered how many soldiers like Nguyen had served throughout military history, their exceptional abilities dismissed as luck or exaggeration, because there was no framework for understanding them. Mr. Patterson, thank you for sharing that story. Your partner's abilities were real, and you were right to trust what you witnessed. There are more people like him than anyone realizes, but they've often been forced to hide their capabilities because others couldn't understand them. The crowd had grown quiet during this exchange, sensing that they were witnessing something more significant than a celebrity meet and greet. Elena looked around at the assembled faces and saw a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. Many of these people had come seeking entertainment, but some seemed to be searching for something deeper: validation, understanding, or perhaps recognition of abilities they possessed themselves. A young woman near the back of the crowd raised her hand tentatively. Master Sergeant, I'm a competitive shooter, and sometimes when I'm shooting my best, it feels like I'm not really in control anymore, like something else is guiding the shots. Is that ... Is that normal? Elena recognized the hesitation in the woman's voice, the uncertainty of someone describing experiences that others might dismiss as imagination or wishful thinking. What's your name? Jennifer Walsh. I compete in precision rifle competitions, mostly long-range events. I've won a few regional championships, but I've never understood why I'm able to shoot better than people with more experience and better equipment. Elena saw an opportunity to provide the kind of validation and guidance that she had never received during her own development. Jennifer, the feeling you're describing of something else guiding your shots, that's a sign that you're accessing abilities that go beyond conscious control. It's not normal in the sense that most people experience it, but it's not abnormal either. It's a natural human capability that appears in certain individuals under specific conditions. Jennifer's face lit up with relief and excitement. So I'm not imagining it, it's really happening? It's really happening. And with proper understanding and training, you could probably develop those abilities much further than you have already. The crowd erupted in excited chatter as people began sharing their own experiences with unusual accuracy or intuitive shooting. Elena found herself at the center of an impromptu support group for individuals who had always felt isolated by abilities they couldn't explain. It was simultaneously gratifying and overwhelming gratifying because she was finally able to provide the kind of understanding she had always craved. Overwhelming because the demand for such guidance was clearly enormous. David stepped forward with his camera crew, recognizing that they were capturing something unprecedented. Master Sergeant, what you're describing suggests that exceptional marksmanship might be far more common than anyone realizes. Are you saying that the military has been missing opportunities to develop these abilities? Elena hesitated, aware that her answer could have significant implications for military training and recruitment policies. I'm saying that we've been operating under assumptions about human limitations that might not be accurate. There are people serving in every branch of the military who have capabilities they've never been able to fully develop because there's been no framework for recognizing or nurturing those abilities. And you think that could change? I think it has to change. If we're going to maintain our technological and tactical advantages in an increasingly complex security environment, we need to be doing everything possible to identify and develop exceptional human capabilities. That includes abilities that might seem to transcend normal limitations. The impromptu gathering continued for another hour, with Elena fielding questions from military veterans, competitive shooters, and civilians who had experienced unusual accuracy in hunting or recreational shooting. She found herself serving as both technical expert and informal therapist, helping people understand that their experiences were valid and potentially valuable. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Elena reflected on how dramatically her perspective had shifted in just a few days. She had started the week thinking of her abilities as a personal burden or advantage, something that set her apart from other soldiers. But the conversations with Private Martinez, the documentary crew, and now this diverse group of individuals with similar experiences had revealed that she was part of a much larger community of people with exceptional abilities. The realization was both liberating and daunting. Liberating because it meant she was no longer alone in her experiences. Daunting because it suggested that she might have responsibilities that extended far beyond her individual military career. Marcus approached her as the last of the crowd. Departed. Elena, that was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. All those people sharing stories about abilities they've kept secret for years. You gave them something they've been looking for their whole lives. Elena nodded, still processing the emotional intensity of the last few hours. Marcus, what if we've been approaching this all wrong? What if exceptional marksmanship isn't about finding the rare individual with perfect vision and steady hands? What if it's about recognizing and developing abilities that are actually fairly common but usually go unnoticed? You mean there might be a lot more people like you out there? I mean there might be people like me in every unit, every base, every training company. We just haven't known how to look for them or what to do with them when we find them. David appeared beside them, his camera crew still filming. Master Sergeant, what you just did here could change how the military thinks about human potential. Are you prepared for that kind of impact? Elena looked around the now empty area where the crowd had gathered, thinking about all the stories she had heard and all the people who had finally found someone who understood their experiences. For the first time in her career, she felt like she had found her true purpose, not just as an exceptional marksman, but as a bridge between the mystical aspects of human capability and the practical demands of military effectiveness. I think I have to be, Elena said. Because if I don't help these people understand and develop their abilities, who will? The Pentagon meeting was scheduled for 0800 hours. On a Tuesday morning that felt heavy with autumn humidity, Elena had never been inside the massive building before, and she found herself disoriented by the seemingly endless corridors and the constant flow of uniformed personnel, moving with purposeful urgency. She had been summoned by General Patricia Morrison, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, after the documentary footage had reached senior leadership levels and sparked what her escort described as significant interest in operational Implications. Elena's dress blue uniform felt uncomfortably formal after months of combat fatigues and range clothes. The ribbons and badges on her chest told the story of her career in compressed visual shorthand, but she wondered if the general would understand the experiences those decorations represented. The Bronze Star with V device from Afghanistan, the Expert Marksmanship badge with numerous qualification bars, the Parachutist Wings and Special Forces tab that marked her participation in joint operations, each piece of metal and fabric carried memories that seemed impossibly distant from the sterile hallways of the Pentagon. The conference room was smaller than Elena had expected, with a polished table that reflected the overhead fluorescent lights and chairs arranged for perhaps a dozen participants. General Morrison was already seated when Elena entered, flanked by two colonels and a civilian in an expensive suit who was introduced as Dr. Michael Stevens from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Master Sergeant Vasquez, General, Morrison said, rising to shake Elena's hand. Thank you for making the trip. Please, have a seat. I'll get straight to the point. We need to understand what you can do and whether it can be replicated. Elena settled into her chair, maintaining the rigid posture that military protocol demanded in the presence of such senior leadership. General Morrison was a compact woman in her early 50s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that suggested decades of making difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Her reputation preceded her. She was known throughout the Army as someone who combined tactical brilliance with an impatience for bureaucratic inefficiency. Ma'am, I'm not sure my abilities can be easily replicated. They seem to be the result of natural aptitude combined with specific training and experience. Dr. Stevens leaned forward, his expression intense with scientific curiosity. Master Sergeant, I've reviewed the footage of your quarter demonstration and the ballistic analysis that Lieutenant Morrison prepared. What you accomplished is statistically impossible using conventional understanding of human performance limitations. We need to understand the mechanisms involved. Elena felt the familiar discomfort of having her personal experiences subjected to clinical analysis. Dr. Stevens, with respect, some aspects of marksmanship can't be reduced to statistics or mechanisms. There are elements that exist in the realm of intuition and instinct. Everything can be measured and analyzed, Dr. Stevens replied. The human brain is a biological computer, and exceptional performance is simply a matter of optimized processing. If we can understand how your brain functions during these moments of hyper-performance, we can potentially develop training protocols that replicate those states in other individuals. General Morrison raised a hand to interrupt the brewing disagreement. Dr. Stevens, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Master Sergeant Vasquez, I want to show you something that might change your perspective on this conversation. The general opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. Elena recognized them as military personnel records, but they were heavily redacted with black marker obscuring most of the text. What remained visible were names, units, dates of service, and brief performance summaries. These are records of soldiers who have demonstrated marksmanship capabilities similar to yours over the past 20 years, General Morrison explained. Staff Sergeant William Harris, Marine Corps, who eliminated 7 enemy combatants at ranges exceeding 1,800 meters during the Second Battle of Fallujah. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, Army Special Forces, who achieved a 98% hit rate on targets beyond 1,500 meters during operations in Syria. Technical Sergeant James White, Air Force Security Forces, who stopped a terrorist attack in Afghanistan with a single shot at 2,100 meters using a standard issue M24. Elena studied the records with growing amazement. Each document described achievements that paralleled her own experiences. Shots that should have been impossible but had been documented and verified by multiple witnesses. How many records like this exist? More than we initially realized, General Morrison replied. When word of your quarter demonstration reached my office, I ordered a comprehensive review of after-action reports and performance evaluations from the past 2 decades. We found evidence of exceptional marksmanship in approximately 1 out of every 5,000 military personnel, far more common than we had assumed. Dr. Stevens pulled out a laptop and opened a presentation that filled the room's wall-mounted display. Master Sergeant, what we're proposing is a systematic study of these exceptional performers. Brain imaging, reflexive testing, genetic analysis, training protocol development. If we can identify the factors that contribute to abilities like yours, we can potentially enhance the performance of thousands of soldiers. Elena stared at the presentation slides, which showed brain scans, performance charts, and proposed experimental protocols that looked more like science fiction than military training. The idea of turning her personal experiences into laboratory data felt fundamentally wrong, like trying to dissect a work of art to understand beauty. General Morrison, with respect, what you're describing sounds like trying to manufacture something that might be inherently personal and individual. These abilities, they're not just about brain function or reflexes. They're about something deeper. One of the colonels spoke for the first time. Master Sergeant, with the threats we're facing from peer competitors who are investing heavily in advanced weapon systems, we can't afford to ignore any potential advantage. If exceptional marksmanship can be systematized and scaled, it could represent a significant force multiplier. Elena recognized the colonel's logic, but felt a growing resistance to the direction of the conversation. The idea of turning soldiers, like herself, into weapon systems ignored the human elements that made their abilities possible. The years of personal development, the individual relationships with mentors and equipment, the psychological processes that couldn't be reduced to training modules. Colonel, what if systematizing these abilities actually destroys them? What if the things that make exceptional marksmanship possible can't be replicated in a laboratory or a classroom? Dr. Stevens looked skeptical. Master Sergeant, every human capability has underlying mechanisms that can be understood and enhanced. We've made tremendous advances in optimizing athletic performance, cognitive function, and reaction times. Marksmanship is just another skill set that can benefit from scientific analysis. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a crystallization of thoughts and feelings that had been building since her conversation with Private Martinez. She realized that the Pentagon officials weren't interested in understanding her abilities. They were interested in exploiting them. They saw her not as a person with a unique gift, but as a biological system to be reverse-engineered and mass-produced. Dr. Stevens, have you ever fired a rifle in combat? The civilian looked uncomfortable. No, but I don't see how that's relevant to understanding the neurological mechanisms involved. It's relevant because you're treating this like a technical problem when it's actually a human problem. The abilities you want to study aren't just about brain function or muscle memory. They're about trust in your equipment, trust in your training, trust in your own judgment under the most extreme stress imaginable. You can't manufacture that in a laboratory. General Morrison studied Elena with the calculating gaze of someone trying to assess an unexpected tactical situation. Master Sergeant, are you saying that you don't want to help us understand and develop these abilities in other soldiers? Elena chose her words carefully, aware that her response could have significant implications for her career and for soldiers, like Private Martinez, who might benefit from better understanding of exceptional abilities. Ma'am, I'm saying that I want to help in the right way. These abilities are too important and too rare to be treated as just another research project. They need to be developed through mentorship, through personal relationships between exceptional performers and students who show similar potential. That sounds like an extremely inefficient approach, Dr. Stevens objected. How many soldiers could you personally train in a career? A dozen? 20? We're talking about the potential to enhance the capabilities of thousands. Elena leaned back in her chair, thinking about all the conversations she had held over the past week with Private Martinez, with the crowd at Fort Carson, with veterans who had witnessed exceptional marksmanship but never understood what they were seeing. The need for guidance and understanding was enormous, but it couldn't be met through mass production techniques. Dr. Stevens, what if the goal isn't to create thousands of soldiers with my exact abilities? What if the goal is to help thousands of soldiers understand and develop their own unique capabilities? What if exceptional performance isn't about replicating what I do, but about recognizing and nurturing the different forms of excellence that already exist? General Morrison looked intrigued. Explain what you mean. Elena pulled out her phone and showed the general a photograph from the previous week's gathering at Fort Carson. Ma'am, when I talked to that crowd of people, I discovered that exceptional ability takes many different forms. There were hunters who could track game through terrain that others found impossible to navigate, competitive shooters who could read wind conditions with uncanny accuracy, veterans who could identify threats at distances that exceeded normal visual capability. None of them could do exactly what I do, but all of them had developed exceptional capabilities in their own areas. And you think these various abilities could be relevant to military operations? I think they're already relevant, ma'am. We just haven't recognized them or learned how to develop them systematically. Instead of trying to create super soldiers in laboratories, what if we focused on identifying and nurturing the exceptional capabilities that already exist in our ranks? Dr. Stevens shook his head dismissively. Master Sergeant, that's essentially advocating for abandoning scientific rigor in favor of folk wisdom and intuition. The military has moved beyond that approach for good reasons. Elena felt her patience wearing thin. Dr. Stevens, with respect, scientific rigor is useful for understanding mechanical systems. Human beings aren't machines, and human excellence isn't a software program that can be copied and installed. The abilities we're discussing emerge from the intersection of genetics, training, experience, and something that might be called spirit or soul. You can't replicate that in a laboratory. General Morrison raised her hand to forestall another argument between Elena and Dr. Stevens. Master Sergeant, let's assume for a moment that you're correct and these abilities can't be systematically replicated. What would you propose as an alternative approach? Elena had been thinking about this question since her conversation with Colonel Hayes, and she felt ready with a comprehensive answer. Ma'am, I propose establishing a mentor-based program that pairs soldiers with demonstrated exceptional abilities with students who show similar potential. Instead of trying to mass-produce a specific type of performance, we focus on helping individuals discover and develop their own unique forms of excellence. Can you be more specific about how such a program would work? Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a proposal she had been developing since her transfer orders to Fort Benning. Ma'am, the program would have 3 components. First, identification protocols that go beyond standard marksmanship scores to recognize soldiers with unusual perceptual abilities, intuitive decision-making, or other indicators of exceptional potential. Second, personalized mentorship programs that pair these soldiers with experienced performers who can guide their development. Third, documentation and research protocols that capture what we learn without trying to reduce it to standardized procedures. Dr. Stevens studied the proposal with obvious skepticism. This sounds like you're proposing to institutionalize mysticism rather than develop scientific understanding. Elena turned to face the civilian directly. Dr. Stevens, what I'm proposing is to institutionalize recognition that human capability extends beyond what current scientific models can explain or predict. That doesn't mean abandoning science. It means expanding our definition of what constitutes valid knowledge. General Morrison leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Master Sergeant, you mentioned documentation and research protocols. What Kind of data would you propose collecting? Longitudinal studies of soldiers identified through the program, tracking their performance over time and across different operational contexts. Detailed case studies of exceptional achievements, focusing on the conditions and factors that enabled them. Analysis of mentorship relationships to understand what makes them effective. But most importantly, ma'am, qualitative data that captures the subjective experiences of exceptional performers. And you believe this approach would be more effective than Dr. Stevens' proposed laboratory studies? Elena chose her words carefully, aware that she was challenging the fundamental assumptions of military research and development. Ma'am, I believe it would be more effective because it treats exceptional ability as something to be cultivated, rather than manufactured. You can't create a marksman like me by optimizing brain function and reaction times. You create marksmen like me by helping soldiers discover abilities they already possess and providing them with the guidance and support they need to develop those abilities to their full potential. The room fell silent as General Morrison considered Elena's proposal. Dr. Stevens looked frustrated by what he clearly viewed as a rejection of scientific methodology, while the two colonels appeared uncertain about whether they were witnessing innovation or insubordination. Finally, General Morrison spoke. Master Sergeant, your proposal is unconventional, but the conventional approaches haven't produced results like yours. I'm willing to authorize a pilot program based on your recommendations with 2 conditions. Elena felt a surge of excitement tempered by wariness about what those conditions might be. First, the program will be implemented at Fort Benning under your direct supervision, allowing you to test your theories with actual students. Second, Dr. Stevens will be attached to the program as a research observer, documenting outcomes and attempting to identify measurable factors that contribute to success. Elena glanced at Dr. Stevens, who looked like he had just been assigned to study unicorns. She realized that the general was attempting to balance Elena's intuitive approach with the institutional demand for scientific validation. Ma'am, I can work with those conditions, but I need to be clear about something. If Dr. Stevens' research activities interfere with the mentorship relationships or create pressure to quantify things that can't be quantified, the program won't work. Dr. Stevens bristled. Master Sergeant, I'm perfectly capable of conducting non-intrusive observational research. But I also need to be clear that if this program can't produce measurable results, it won't receive continued funding or support. General Morrison nodded. Those are reasonable positions from both of you. Master Sergeant, you'll have 6 months to demonstrate that your approach can identify and develop exceptional capabilities in other soldiers. Dr. Stevens, you'll have the same 6 months to document any patterns or factors that might inform future programs. Elena realized that she had just committed herself to proving that her most personal and mysterious experiences could be systematically shared with others. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because it offered the possibility of helping soldiers like Private Martinez develop their potential. Terrifying because failure would likely end any chance of serious military investment in understanding exceptional human capabilities. Ma'am, there's one more thing I need to discuss. The soldiers I'll be working with, they need to understand that what we're doing is experimental and that their participation is completely voluntary. I won't subject anyone to training methods they're not comfortable with. Agreed. You'll have full authority to structure the program as you see fit within the bounds of military regulations and safety protocols. Elena stood and shook hands with General Morrison, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had just been given the opportunity to prove that exceptional human capabilities could be systematically developed through mentorship and individual guidance rather than laboratory analysis and mass production techniques. As she left the Pentagon and drove back toward Fort Benning, Elena found herself thinking about Private Martinez and all the other soldiers who might benefit from a program that recognized and nurtured their unique abilities. For the first time in her military career, She felt like she was embarking on a mission that could fundamentally change how the Kiev Army understood and developed human potential. The pilot program would begin in 3 weeks, and Elena knew that those 6 months would determine not just the future of exceptional marksmanship training, but the broader question of whether the military was ready to embrace forms of human excellence that couldn't be easily measured or replicated. Elena's phone rang as she crossed into Georgia. It was Marcus Chun, calling with news that both excited and concerned her. "Elena, you need to know that Private Martinez isn't the only one. Since word got out about your Pentagon meeting, I've had 17 soldiers approach me asking about opportunities to develop unusual marksmanship abilities. 17, Elena. In 1 week." Elena felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The demand for what she was proposing was clearly enormous, but so was the responsibility of meeting that demand effectively. "Marcus, what kinds of abilities are these soldiers describing?" "Everything you'd expect and some things you wouldn't. Enhanced depth perception, intuitive wind reading, the ability to predict target movement, even a few who claim they can sense threats before they become visible." "Elena, what if you've opened the door to something much bigger than any of us realized?" Elena considered this possibility as she continued driving south toward her new assignment. What if exceptional marksmanship was just one manifestation of a broader spectrum of human capabilities that the military had never systematically recognized or developed? What if her 6-month pilot program was actually the beginning of a fundamental shift in how the armed forces understood and utilized human potential? "Marcus, document everything these soldiers tell you. When I get the program started at Benning, I want to bring in some of these people as test cases." "Elena, are you sure you're ready for this? Because based on what I'm seeing here, you might be about to change the entire culture of military training." Elena smiled as she passed a sign welcoming her to Fort Benning, Georgia. "Marcus, I think that might be exactly what needs to happen." 3 hours later, Elena stood in the empty classroom that would serve as headquarters for her pilot program. The space was utilitarian white walls, fluorescent lights, and government-issue furniture that had seen decades of use. But as she looked around the room, Elena could envision it filled with soldiers discovering capabilities they had never known they possessed. Mentors sharing knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual, and the beginning of a new understanding of what human beings were truly capable of achieving. Elena opened her laptop and began drafting the curriculum for what she was already thinking of as the Exceptional Capabilities Development Program. She had 6 months to prove that human excellence could be systematically nurtured without being mechanistically replicated. 6 months to demonstrate that the mysterious aspects of exceptional performance were not obstacles to be overcome, but resources to be honored and developed. As she worked, Elena found herself thinking about her father, about his struggles with the purpose and implications of his unusual abilities. She wondered if this program might represent the answer to questions he had never been able to resolve, a way to use exceptional capabilities in service of something larger than individual achievement or even military effectiveness. For the first time since her grandmother had revealed her father's story, Elena felt like she understood the true nature of her inheritance. It wasn't just the ability to achieve impossible accuracy with a rifle. It was the responsibility to help others discover and develop their own exceptional capabilities. It was the chance to prove that human potential extended far beyond what conventional wisdom suggested was possible. Elena saved her document and closed her laptop, feeling ready for the challenge ahead. In 6 months, she would either revolutionize military training or prove that some forms of human excellence were too mysterious and individual to be systematically developed. Either way, she was finally embarking on the mission that her abilities had always been meant to serve. 2 years after the Pentagon meeting, Elena stood before a classroom filled with the 3rd cohort of students in what had become officially known as the Enhanced Human Performance Initiative. The program had far exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. What had started as a 6-month pilot project had evolved into a permanent training program that was being replicated at installations across all branches of the military. The students in front of her represented a new generation of soldiers who had been identified not just for their marksmanship potential, but for a wide range of exceptional capabilities that had previously gone unrecognized. There was Sergeant Kim Nakamura, who could track targets through urban environments with an almost supernatural ability to predict movement patterns. Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez, no relation to the original Private Martinez, who was now Sergeant Martinez and serving as an instructor at Fort Campbell, whose situational awareness allowed him to identify threats at ranges that exceeded normal human visual capability. Corporal Lisa Thompson, who could read environmental conditions, wind, humidity, temperature variations with an accuracy that surpassed meteorological instruments. Today marks your graduation from the initial phase of the program, Elena announced. To the assembled students, you've learned not just technical skills, but how to recognize and develop capabilities that extend beyond conventional training. More importantly, you've learned that exceptional performance is not about being superhuman, it's about being fully human. Elena looked around the classroom, noting how different it was from the sterile space she had inherited 2 years earlier. The walls were now covered with photographs, charts, and documents that told the story of the program's evolution. There were pictures of graduates in operational environments, testimonials from commanding officers who had witnessed extraordinary performance, and research summaries that Dr. Stevens had compiled documenting the measurable impacts of the program. Relationship with Dr. Stevens had evolved significantly over the 2-year period. Initially skeptical of Elena's mentorship-based approach, he had gradually come to understand that exceptional human capabilities could be documented and studied without being reduced to mechanical processes. His research had identified several factors that seemed to correlate with exceptional performance: genetic markers related to enhanced sensory processing, childhood experiences that developed unusual attention to detail, and psychological profiles that indicated high levels of intrinsic motivation. But more importantly, Dr. Stevens had learned to appreciate what he called the irreducible human element in exceptional performance. His final report to the Pentagon concluded that while certain factors could be identified and measured, the actual development of exceptional capabilities required the kind of personalized mentorship that Elena had insisted upon from the beginning. Master. Sergeant Vasquez, Corporal Thompson raised her hand. What happens to us now? Are we going back to regular units, or will we continue working together? Elena smiled, remembering asking similar questions during her own early military training. Corporal, you're going to different assignments, but you're not going alone. Each of you will be paired with mentors who understand your specific capabilities and can help you continue developing them in operational environments. And more importantly, each of you will eventually become mentors yourselves, helping the next generation of soldiers discover their own exceptional capabilities. This had been one of the most significant discoveries of the program, that soldiers who had developed exceptional capabilities through mentorship became exceptionally effective mentors themselves. Unlike traditional instructors who taught standardized techniques, these mentor graduates could recognize and nurture the individual forms of excellence that each new student possessed. Sergeant Nakamura raised her hand. Ma'am, are there still people who think what we do is impossible or unreal? Elena considered the question carefully. Despite the program's success, there remains significant skepticism within military leadership about capabilities that couldn't be easily explained or quantified. Several senior officers had expressed concern that the program was promoting mystical thinking that might undermine the technical and scientific foundations of modern military training. Sergeant Nakamura, there will always be people who are uncomfortable with forms of excellence that challenge their understanding of human limitations. Our job is not to convince the skeptics. Our job is to continue developing and demonstrating capabilities that serve the mission and protect our fellow soldiers. After the graduation ceremony, Elena walked across the Fort Benning campus to a meeting with Colonel Jennifer Hayes, Rebecca Hayes' younger sister, who had been assigned to oversee the expansion of the Enhanced Human Performance Initiative to other installations. The family resemblance was strong, but Jennifer Hayes possessed an openness to unconventional approaches that her sister had initially lacked. "Elena," Colonel Hayes said as they settled into her office, "I have news from the Pentagon. General Morrison wants to expand the program to include civilian contractors and allied military personnel. She's convinced that we're sitting on a force multiplier that could fundamentally change how we approach human performance in military contexts." Elena felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. The program's success had been built on careful selection of students and mentors, intimate knowledge of individual capabilities, and the kind of personal relationships that were difficult to scale beyond a certain size. "Colonel, I'm honored by the General's confidence, but I'm concerned about expanding too quickly. What we do here works because we can maintain quality control and personal attention. If we try to scale it up too rapidly, we might lose the elements." "That make it effective," Colonel Hayes nodded. "That's exactly what I told General Morrison, which is why she's proposing a different approach. Instead of expanding the central program, she wants to establish regional centers where graduates like your current students can develop their own mentorship programs based on local needs and capabilities." Elena found this approach much more appealing. It would allow the core principles of the program to spread while maintaining the personalized approach that seemed essential to its effectiveness. What kind of support would these regional centers receive? Full funding, personnel assignments, and access to the research and documentation that Dr. Stevens has compiled. But most importantly, they'll have autonomy to adapt the program to their specific context and student populations. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing proposals for the first 5 regional centers. The locations had been chosen to represent different operational environments and military cultures. Camp Pendleton for Marine Corps integration, Fort Campbell for special operations applications, Naval Air Station Norfolk for Navy and Air Force. Participants, Fort Hood for large-scale conventional forces, and Joint Base Lewis McChord for joint service operations. Each location would be staffed by graduates of Elena's program, supported by researchers trained in Dr. Stevens' documentation methods, and given the freedom to develop their own approaches to identifying and nurturing exceptional capabilities. That evening, Elena returned to her quarters to find a message waiting from Private now Sergeant Sarah Martinez, who had completed the program's first cohort and was currently serving as a mentor at Fort Campbell. The message included photographs from a recent training exercise where Martinez had successfully identified and developed exceptional capabilities in 3 soldiers from different units. "Elena," Martinez had written, "I finally understand what you meant about this being bigger than any of us realized. The soldiers I'm working with have abilities that go far beyond marksmanship. One of them can navigate in complete darkness using some kind of enhanced spatial awareness. Another can predict equipment failures before any diagnostic tools detect problems. We're not just training better shooters, we're discovering that human beings are capable of things that our training manuals never imagined." Elena read the message with a sense of satisfaction that was deeper than professional pride. Martinez's experience confirmed that the program was achieving its ultimate goal, not just developing exceptional capabilities in individual soldiers, but changing how the military understood and nurtured human potential. Elena's phone rang with a call from an unexpected source, Jennifer Walsh, the competitive shooter who had attended the impromptu gathering at Fort Carson 2 years earlier. Elena had stayed in touch with several of the civilians from that event, curious about how they were developing their abilities outside of military contexts. "Elena, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to share some news. I just won the National Precision Rifle Championship. And I wanted to thank you for helping me understand that my abilities were real and worth developing." Elena smiled, remembering the uncertain young woman who had hesitantly described experiences she wasn't sure others would believe. "Jennifer, congratulations. That's an incredible achievement, but that's not why I'm calling. Elena, there are people in the civilian shooting community who are organizing informal mentorship programs based on what they learned from your documentary. We're calling them capability circles, small groups where people with different forms of exceptional ability help each other develop their gifts." Elena found this development fascinating. The principles that had proven effective in military contexts were apparently transferable to civilian applications, suggesting that the need for recognition and development of exceptional capabilities extended far beyond military training. "How many of these capability circles exist?" "At least 30 that I know of, probably more. And Elena, the abilities people are discovering go far beyond shooting. There are hunters who can track game in ways that seem almost magical, mechanics who can diagnose problems by listening to engine sounds that others can't even hear, outdoors enthusiasts who can navigate by reading natural signs that most people don't notice." Elena realized that what she had initiated in military contexts was part of a much larger cultural shift toward recognizing and nurturing forms of human excellence that had previously been dismissed as luck, intuition, or wishful thinking. 6 months later, Elena received orders for what would be her final military assignment, promotion to sergeant major, and appointment as the senior enlisted advisor for the Enhanced Human Performance Initiative at the Pentagon. The position would allow her to oversee the continued expansion of the program while ensuring that it maintained the principles and approaches that had made it successful. As she prepared to leave Fort Benning, Elena reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the morning when Colonel Rebecca Hayes had demanded proof of her capabilities. What had started as a demonstration of individual ability had evolved into a systematic approach to recognizing and developing forms of human excellence that the military had never previously understood or utilized. The night before her departure, Elena attended a farewell gathering organized by her current students and former graduates who were stationed at Fort Benning. The event was held at the range facility where she had spent countless hours developing her own abilities and helping others discover theirs. Dr. Stevens approached her during the gathering, carrying a thick folder that contained the final research report on the Enhanced Human Performance Initiative. "Elena, I wanted to give you this personally. It's the complete documentation of everything we've learned over the past 2.5 years. Elena accepted the folder with curiosity. "What are your conclusions?" Dr. Stevens smiled, an expression that would have been unimaginable during their first contentious meeting at the Pentagon. "My primary conclusion is that you were right and I was wrong. Exceptional human capabilities can't be manufactured in laboratories, but they can be systematically recognized and developed through the kind of mentorship relationships you insisted upon." "And the Pentagon is satisfied with that conclusion?" "More than satisfied. General Morrison is convinced that this program represents one of the most significant advances in military human performance since the development of modern physical training protocols. She's already requesting funding to establish 20 additional regional centers over the next 3 years. Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction at this validation, but also a growing awareness of the responsibilities that came with success. The program she had developed was no longer just an experiment, it was becoming a permanent part of how the military understood and developed human potential. As the farewell gathering continued around her, Elena found herself thinking about her father and the struggles he had faced with understanding the purpose of his exceptional abilities. She wondered if he would have been proud of what she had accomplished, if he would have seen the program as the answer to questions he had never been able to resolve. Abuela Carmen's voice echoed in Elena's memory. "God gives every person one perfect gift. Yours is the ability to make the impossible look simple. You must be careful how you use it. Elena realized that she had finally learned how to use her gift in a way that honored both its personal significance and its larger purpose. She had proven that exceptional human capabilities were not anomalies to be studied or resources to be exploited, but aspects of human potential that deserved recognition, respect, and careful development. The Enhanced Human Performance Initiative had become more than a military training program. It was a new way of understanding what human beings were capable of achieving when their unique gifts were recognized and nurtured by people who understood their value. As Elena prepared for her new role at the Pentagon, she knew that her most important work was just beginning. The program would continue to expand and evolve, helping thousands of soldiers discover capabilities they had never known they possessed. But more importantly, it would serve as proof that human excellence came in many forms, and that the military's greatest strength lay not in standardized training or advanced technology, but in recognizing and developing the extraordinary potential that existed within ordinary people. 5 years later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the Arlington National Cemetery as Elena stood before her father's grave, wearing the blue uniform of a command sergeant major. The promotion had come the previous month, along with assignment as the senior enlisted advisor for what had become the Department of Defense Human Excellence Initiative, a program that now operated across all branches of the military and had been adopted by allied nations around the world. Elena placed a small stone on top of her father's headstone, following a tradition her grandmother had taught her years before. The stone had been collected from the rifle range at Fort Benning, where the Enhanced Human Performance Initiative had first proven that exceptional human capabilities could be systematically recognized and developed. "Papa," Elena said quietly, "I think I finally understand what you were struggling with. The gift isn't just about being able to shoot better than other people. It's about helping other people discover what they're capable of." The cemetery was peaceful in the early morning hours, with only the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional aircraft from nearby Reagan National Airport disturbing the silence. Elena had made this pilgrimage every year since learning about her father's abilities, but this visit felt different, more like a conversation between equals than a daughter seeking guidance from a parent she had barely known. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Sergeant Major Martinez, who now served as her deputy at the Pentagon. The message contained a photograph from the latest regional training center, showing a group of soldiers who had just completed the Enhanced Capabilities Assessment Program. Their faces showed the same mixture of excitement and wonder that Elena remembered from her own students, the look of people discovering abilities they had never known they possessed. The program had evolved far beyond Elena's original vision. What had started as a specialized training initiative for exceptional marksmen had become a comprehensive approach to identifying and developing the full spectrum of human performance capabilities. The regional centers now trained soldiers in enhanced situational awareness, intuitive decision-making, advanced sensory processing, and dozens of other abilities that conventional training had never addressed. More importantly, the program had begun to change how the military understood the relationship between human beings and technology. Instead of viewing soldiers as biological components in technological systems, military leaders were learning to see technology as a tool for enhancing and supporting human capabilities that were themselves the primary strategic assets. Elena's phone rang with a call from Jennifer Walsh, who had become the civilian coordinator for the capability circles that had emerged in communities across the country. The civilian program had grown even faster than the military initiative, with over 300 local groups now providing mentorship and development opportunities for people with exceptional abilities. "Elena, I'm calling with incredible news. The National Science Foundation has approved funding for a comprehensive study of exceptional human Capabilities in civilian populations. We're going to be able to document and research these abilities at a scale that was never possible before. Elena felt a surge of excitement at this development. Academic research would provide scientific credibility that could help overcome the skepticism that still existed in some quarters about abilities that couldn't be easily explained or quantified. Jennifer, that's fantastic. What kind of research are they proposing? Everything we've been hoping for. Longitudinal studies of people identified through the capability circles. Neurological research into the brain mechanisms involved in exceptional performance, genetic studies to understand hereditary factors, and most importantly, comprehensive documentation of the mentorship relationships that seem to be essential for developing these abilities. Elena realized that the research Jennifer was describing would finally provide the scientific foundation that Dr. Stevens had been seeking from the beginning. But it would be science informed by years of practical experience with developing exceptional capabilities, rather than laboratory studies that ignored the human elements that made such development possible. After ending the call with Jennifer, Elena walked slowly through the cemetery, thinking about all the changes that had occurred since that morning when Colonel Hayes had demanded proof of her abilities. The quarter shoot that had seemed so important at the time now felt like a minor footnote in a much larger story about human potential and the responsibility that came with recognizing it. Elena's path through the cemetery took her past the graves of other soldiers whose exceptional abilities had contributed to military operations throughout American history. She paused at the grave of Sergeant Alvin York, the World War I hero whose marksmanship achievements had seemed almost supernatural to his contemporaries. She wondered how many other soldiers throughout history had possessed abilities similar to her own, but had never received the recognition or development opportunities that might have allowed them to reach their full potential. The thought reminded Elena of a conversation she had held the previous week with General Morrison, who was now the Army Chief of Staff and the primary Pentagon advocate for the Human Excellence Initiative. The general had shared classified historical research suggesting that exceptional human capabilities had played significant roles in military operations dating back to the Revolutionary War, but had rarely been systematically recognized or developed. Elena, General Morrison had said, what you've accomplished isn't just about creating better soldiers for future conflicts. You've helped us understand that we've been underutilizing human potential for the entire history of the military. The question now is how quickly we can make up for lost time. Elena left Arlington National Cemetery and drove to the Pentagon for a meeting with an international delegation that was visiting to learn about the Human Excellence Initiative. The delegation included military representatives from 12 allied nations, all of whom were interested in adapting the program to their own cultural and operational contexts. The meeting took place in the same conference room where Elena had first presented her ideas to General Morrison 5 years earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different. Now, instead of skepticism and resistance, there was eager curiosity about how the program's principles could be implemented in different military traditions and organizational structures. Command Sergeant Major Vasquez, the Canadian representative, began. Our preliminary research suggests that we have soldiers with abilities similar to those your program has identified, but we've never had a systematic way of recognizing or developing them. How do we begin implementing something like your initiative? Elena had answered this question dozens of times over the past few years, but she never tired of sharing the insights that had made the program successful. The most important thing is to start with mentorship relationships rather than administrative structures. Find your most exceptional performers and give them the time and resources to work with soldiers who show similar potential. The formal program elements can be developed later, but the personal relationships are what make everything else possible. The British representative raised his hand. Command Sergeant Major, what about resistance from traditional training establishments? We're encountering significant skepticism about abilities that can't be easily measured or replicated. Elena smiled, remembering her own encounters with similar skepticism. That resistance is natural and actually valuable. It forces you to prove that what you're doing produces real operational benefits. The skeptics become your strongest supporters once they see the results, but only if you can demonstrate clear improvements in mission effectiveness. The meeting continued for 3 hours, with representatives sharing their own experiences with exceptional performers and asking detailed questions about implementation strategies. Elena was struck by how similar the challenges were across different military cultures and languages. The same needs for recognition, development, and understanding that she had encountered in American soldiers appeared to be universal human experiences. After the international delegation departed, Elena remained in the conference room to review the agenda for the following day's meeting with congressional representatives who were considering funding for a civilian version of the Human Excellence Initiative. The proposed program would establish capability development centers in major metropolitan areas, providing mentorship and training opportunities for civilians with exceptional abilities. Elena's phone buzzed with a video call from Abuela Carmen, who was now 92 years old, but still sharp enough to follow Elena's career with intense interest. The old woman's face appeared on the screen, her eyes bright with pride and curiosity. "Mia, I saw you on the television again last week. The reporter said you were changing how the whole military thinks about what people can do. Is this true?" Elena smiled at her grandmother's direct approach to complex questions. "Abuela, I think we're helping people discover abilities they always had, but never knew how to develop. Just like you helped me understand lack concentration when I was a little girl." Carmen nodded approvingly. "And your father? Do you think he would be proud of what you've accomplished?" Elena considered the question carefully. Over the past 5 years, she had come to understand her father not just as a parent she had lost, but as a fellow traveler who had struggled with questions about the purpose and responsibility of exceptional abilities. "I think he would be proud that his gift didn't die with him, that it became something that could help other people discover their own gifts." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "Mia, I have something to tell you. I've been saving it for the right moment, and I think that moment is now." Elena felt a familiar sense of anticipation. Her grandmother's revelations had always marked important transitions in her understanding of herself and her abilities. "Your father wrote letters during the war, letters he never sent, where he tried to understand what his abilities meant and how he should use them. I've kept them all these years, but I think it's time you read them." Elena felt her heart skip a beat. The prospect of reading her father's private thoughts about abilities, identical to her own, was both thrilling and overwhelming. "Abuela, are you sure? Those letters are personal to him." "Mia, he wrote them for you, even though he didn't know it at the time. He wrote them for anyone who would carry the same burden and the same blessing. They belong to you now." That evening, Elena sat in her Arlington apartment reading the letters that Abuela Carmen had overnight expressed from Los Angeles. Her father's handwriting was precise and measured, reflecting the same attention to detail that had made him an exceptional marksman. The letters revealed a young soldier wrestling with questions that Elena recognized from her own experience. Miguel Vasquez had written about the isolation of possessing abilities that others couldn't understand, the moral weight of using those abilities to take human lives, and the persistent sense that his gifts were meant for some larger purpose that he couldn't identify. But the letters also revealed something that Elena had never suspected. Her father had encountered other soldiers with similar abilities and had spent considerable time thinking about how such capabilities might be systematically developed and utilized. "There are others like me in this unit," one letter read. "Rodriguez can track targets through terrain that should make it impossible, and Williams seems to know when attacks are coming before any of us see signs of enemy activity. I wonder if these abilities are more common than anyone realizes, and if the Army is missing opportunities to develop them properly. Elena read through the night, finding in her father's words the intellectual foundation for everything she had accomplished over the past 5 years. Miguel Vasquez had identified the same patterns, asked the same questions, and reached many of the same conclusions that had guided the development of the Human Excellence Initiative. The final letter, dated just weeks before his death, contained a passage that brought tears to Elena's eyes. If I have a child someday, and if that child inherits these abilities, I hope they will find a way to use them that honors both their personal significance and their larger purpose. I hope they will prove that exceptional human capabilities are not burdens to be carried alone, but gifts to be shared with others who need guidance in discovering their own potential. Elena closed the letter collection and sat in the darkness of her apartment, feeling the presence of her father's hopes and dreams for the future. She realized that everything she had accomplished, the program development, the mentorship relationships, the research initiatives, had been guided by the same vision that her father had articulated decades earlier. 10 years later, Elena stood before the graduating class of the National Human Excellence Academy, the civilian institution that had grown out of the military program she had developed 15 years earlier. The academy now trained mentors and researchers who worked in capability development centers across the United States and around the world. At 65, Elena had retired from active military service but continued to serve as the senior advisor for human excellence initiatives in both military and civilian contexts. Her hair was now completely gray, and her uniform had been replaced by civilian clothes, but her eyes still held the intense focus that had made her legendary as a marksman. The graduating class included teachers, coaches, healthcare workers, emergency responders, and dozens of other professionals who had learned to recognize and develop exceptional capabilities in their respective fields. Elena looked out at their faces and saw the same mixture of excitement and responsibility that she remembered from her earliest students. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena began, "you are graduating into a world that is finally beginning to understand what human beings are truly capable of achieving. But with that understanding comes responsibility, the responsibility to nurture abilities that might otherwise go undeveloped, to challenge assumptions about human limitations, and to prove that excellence is not reserved for a chosen few, but is a potential that exists in everyone." Elena's speech was interrupted by applause from the audience, which included family members, colleagues, and government officials who had come to recognize the ceremony as a significant milestone in the development of human potential. After the ceremony, Elena walked across the academy campus to a memorial garden that had been dedicated to exceptional performers who had served throughout military history. At the center of the garden stood a simple granite stone engraved with her father's name alongside dozens of other soldiers whose extraordinary abilities had contributed to missions and operations but had never received proper recognition. During their lifetimes, Elena placed her hand on her father's memorial stone, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun that had been absorbed by the granite. Around her, graduates and their families were celebrating achievements that represented far more than individual success. They marked the emergence of a new understanding of human potential that would benefit generations to come. "Command Sergeant." "Major?" A young voice interrupted her reflection. Elena turned to see a girl of perhaps 12 years old, accompanied by one of the graduating students. "This is my daughter Emma," the graduate explained. "She wanted to meet you because she says she experiences some of the things you've written about, the time slowing down, the ability to see patterns that others miss." Elena knelt to Emma's eye level, recognizing in the girl's intense gaze something she had seen in her own mirror decades earlier. "Emma, tell me about these experiences." The girl glanced nervously at her mother, then spoke with the careful precision of someone describing something she wasn't sure others would understand. "When I'm practicing piano, sometimes it feels like I can hear the music before I play it. And when we play sports at school, I can tell what the other kids are going to do before they do it. Mom says it's just good observation, but it feels like more than that. Elena smiled, remembering her own childhood struggles to explain experiences that seemed to transcend normal perception. Emma, what you're describing sounds very real and very special. Have you ever thought about learning to develop those abilities? Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. You mean I could get better at it? I could learn to understand what's happening much better. And more importantly, you could learn to help other people discover their own special abilities. Elena spent another 20 minutes talking with Emma and her mother, providing contact information for the local Capability Development Center and explaining how the girl could begin exploring her apparent gifts in a supportive environment. As Elena walked back to her car, she reflected on how dramatically the world had changed since that morning when Colonel Hayes had demanded proof of impossible marksmanship. What had started as a demonstration of individual ability had evolved into a global movement that was transforming how humanity understood its own potential. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from the current director of the Pentagon's Human Excellence Initiative. The text contained a single statistic that made her smile. Over the past decade, more than 50,000 individuals had been identified and trained through programs descended from her original mentorship approach. 50,000 people who had discovered abilities they never knew they possessed. 50,000 individuals who were now helping others explore the boundaries of human capability. 50,000 proof points that excellence was not an accident of genetics or training, but a birthright that belonged to anyone willing to discover and develop their unique gifts. Elena started her car and drove toward the airport, where she would catch a flight to Geneva for an international conference on human potential development. At 75, she was still traveling the world, still teaching, still proving that the impossible was simply the difficult waiting for the right person to attempt it. As her father had hoped, his gift had not died with him. It had become something much larger, a legacy that would continue to grow and evolve long after Elena herself was gone, helping countless individuals discover that the true limits of human capability were far beyond anything the world had ever imagined possible.